I saw her. There, in the center of the dance floor, illuminated by pale lights, she held his face with both hands as if it were the center of her universe, her lips pressed against his without fear, without guilt, as if everything that existed beyond that kiss no longer mattered. I felt my chest shatter into 1,000 pieces, as if each beat of my heart echoed the sound of her betrayal and the silent scream of the man I was, crushed in a second. I walked towards her, each step heavy as if I were walking on shards of glass, and when I stopped a few inches from the couple, my voice exploded without control. Would you prefer this than being with me and your children, your family? The words flew like sharp knives, and the silence that followed was more deafening than any loud music in that room. She remained pale, frozen, looking at me as if my face were the worst nightmare that could appear there, in the middle of everyone, in front of colleagues, friends, acquaintances. I felt the world stop. I felt my breath catch as her eyes, so familiar and yet so strange, begged me for something that not even she could define, and in that moment I knew there was no going back, that the hole that opened between us and that kiss was too deep to be filled with apologies or tears. As I turned and walked toward the exit, each step seemed to sink my feet into quicksand, but the decision had already been made. I would not bear that pain, I would not live with the image of her and that man burning my eyes every night. So I kept going, without looking back, without allowing the sound of her voice to stop me. But fate is cruel, she came after me. She wanted me back. Desperate, she spent days calling me, sending messages full of regret, saying that it meant nothing, that it was a mistake, that she loved me, that she loved her children, that she wanted to fix what she broke. The tone of her voice on the phone sounded like that of a lost child. The words stumbled in her own shame. Please, listen to me, it was just a moment, I don't know what came over me, I don't want to lose you, please, come home, forgive me, you are everything to me. But each sentence she said only deepened the wound, each tear she shed only echoed in my mind the sound of lips meeting in betrayal. Every night alone, I remembered her smile when she told me she loved me, the dreams we built together, the future we planned with every detail, and I asked myself where I lost control, when I stopped being the man who made her heart beat faster, why she had to look for something in another man that, until recently, she found in me. The pain of betrayal is like a fire that doesn't just consume the flesh, but destroys the soul, burns happy memories, turns affection into poisoned memories, makes the bed feel like a grave where I lie down alone every night. And in the silence of the room, the pillow became a witness to my suffering, her scent still impregnated in the sheets tortured me, my mind revisiting every detail, the dinners we prepared together, the children's birthdays, the hugs on the couch on Sundays, everything now stained by the memory of that kiss, of that moment when my life lost its ground. She wouldn't stop. She would show up at my work, call my friends, beg them to intercede, tell everyone that she was sorry, that she loved me more than anything, that she would do anything to get her family back. But with each desperate gesture she made, I felt the indignity that betrayal leaves in the heart of someone who has been deceived. And the more she asked for forgiveness, the more I realized that it was no longer possible to trust her, that the fear of closing my eyes at night and reliving that scene would stay with me forever. So I found the strength to move on. I started rebuilding my life, I went to therapy, I got closer to my children, I discovered who I was outside of the role of husband, and little by little the smile returned to my face, not because the pain went away, but because I learned to walk with it like a scar that reminds me of who I am. And it was when I least expected it that I met someone else. A woman who saw beyond the wounded man, who understood my silence, who didn't demand that I be happy right away, who just walked by my side, without rushing, slowly giving me back the ability to smile without guilt. When my ex found out, her despair reached another level. She even showed up at my door in the middle of the night, with swollen eyes and a hoarse voice from crying so much, saying that she couldn't live knowing that I could love someone else, that I was the only man she would ever love in her life, that her children needed us together, that our story couldn't end like this. But I just looked at her with the serenity of someone who no longer feels love or hate, only indifference, and that was the greatest punishment she could receive, realizing that her regret came too late. Why do human beings seek out forbidden things that they already have at home? What makes someone put their own family at risk for a few minutes of pleasure? To what extent does pride prevent us from admitting that we need to take care of love every day, before it dies silently? When betrayal explodes like a bomb, it not only destroys trust, but also dreams, projects, and even the very identity of the person who was betrayed. And when we are finally ready to move on, the other person's regret becomes just an echo, a distant sound of something that no longer matters, because life shows us that even the deepest pain does not prevent rebirth. But did she really regret it, or was she just afraid of being alone? And will my heart truly be able to open up to a new love, or will it be forever haunted by the scars of the past? Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any form of cheating. Our stories are fictional and serve to show how infidelity can destroy lives, families, and dreams. Get ready, because what you are about to hear is shocking. We want you to have a good story, and one that makes you think deeply. They seemed like the perfect couple to everyone who knew them. Lucas was a 38-year-old man with a confident demeanor and an easy smile that charmed not only his wife, but also anyone who had the pleasure of crossing his path. A tireless worker, he came home every day with the subtle scent of the perfume that Julia loved to smell on his clothes when she hugged him, that hug that for her was the safest shelter in the world. Julia, at 35, was delicate, vain and attentive to every detail of the home, from the fresh coffee she made every day before her husband woke up to the embroidered towels she sewed herself to make the house welcoming. She worked part-time as a designer at a local architecture studio, which allowed her time to dedicate herself to her children, Miguel, 9, and Sofia, 6, both smart and affectionate, the main reason why the two adults always made the effort to cultivate a home full of smiles and affection. They lived in a spacious house in a quiet neighborhood, with a garden that bloomed every spring, reflecting the care and dedication the couple had for the family they had built. Their marriage began with overwhelming passion. They met at a party for mutual friends and, from the first moment they met, the chemistry was undeniable. Within a few months they were living together, and in less than a year they made their union official in a simple ceremony, but marked by tears of emotion and sincere promises exchanged with the blessing of their parents and closest friends. The first years of their marriage were full of complicity, spontaneous trips to paradisiacal places, sleepless nights exchanging confidences and plans for the future, smiles that lit up any room they shared. Miguel's arrival brought a new light to the house, and even sleepless nights were a reason for togetherness, with Lucas taking turns with Julia to calm the baby, while getting emotional with each little achievement of his son. When Sofia was born, 2 years later, their hearts seemed complete, and they felt unbeatable, a family that nothing could shake. Friends often commented on how inspiring they were, how Lucas made a point of sending flowers on their anniversary, even after years of marriage, or how Julia organized small surprise dinners to keep the flame of passion alive. Every corner of the house had stories recorded: the living room where they danced to their favorite songs, the kitchen where they prepared countless meals together, the garden where the children learned to ride bikes under the watchful and proud eyes of their parents. The routine, although demanding, was full of special moments, like family breakfasts on Sundays, when everyone gathered around the table to share dreams, plan outings, or just laugh at the silly things the children said. Despite the hustle and bustle of everyday life, Lucas and Julia always tried to protect their time as a couple. They liked to walk hand in hand through the neighborhood streets, talking about a variety of subjects, from the movie they had watched the night before to their concerns about their children's future. On nights when the little ones went to bed early, they would watch series that they both liked, curled up on the couch, sharing the same glass of wine and a blanket that they had had since the beginning of their marriage, worn by time but full of meaning. The looks they exchanged, the subtle touches, the lingering kisses showed that there was still a flame there that bravely resisted the adversities of everyday life. At work, Lucas was seen as a dedicated professional, the kind who arrives before everyone else and only leaves once everything is in order. His boss trusted him to manage important projects, and his colleagues respected him not only for his competence, but also for the generosity with which he offered help to those who needed it. Julia, on the other hand, despite her part-time job, was recognized as someone creative and determined, with ideas that surprised clients and delighted colleagues. She managed to masterfully balance the routine of mother, wife and professional, something that always aroused praise and a certain envy among her friends, who did not understand how she managed to do everything with so much care and dedication. Miguel and Sofia grew up surrounded by love and attention, always encouraged to dream big and value respect and unity. Lucas was the kind of father who would kneel down to talk to his children on their level, who would turn bath time into playtime, who would get emotional at every school performance. Julia, on the other hand, attended every parent-teacher meeting, prepared costumes for school parties, read stories every night before bed, and never failed to tell them how much she loved them, no matter how tired she was. They made a point of showing affection in front of their children, believing that seeing their parents' love was essential to building trust and security in children. Little by little, however, the demands of Lucas's job began to increase, and business trips became more frequent. Julia, despite trying to remain calm, began to feel lonely on some nights when the house seemed too big without him. When Lucas came back, exhausted and worried about the goals he had to achieve, their time together became rarer, and deep conversations turned into quick exchanges of information about their children's routine, bills to pay, or the day's problems. Still, they tried to keep their connection alive, planning little getaways together and finding opportunities to be together, but the relentless routine always seemed to find a way to come between them. The children began to feel their father's absence, asking repeatedly when he would return or why he was away so much. Julia did her best to distract them, inventing games, taking them to parks, but deep down, she also missed the companion with whom she shared everything. The nights were long, and while Miguel and Sofia slept, she found herself looking at old photos, remembering trips, remembering the laughter that echoed in the rooms and the warmth of Lucas's embrace, which now seemed increasingly distant. Some days, she even began to doubt whether all this was really part of the life she had always dreamed of or if they were just surviving the routine. Despite her efforts, the small gaps in communication began to grow, silent but constant. Messages took longer to be answered, phone calls were limited to formal conversations, and when Lucas arrived home, he was so tired that he no longer allowed for long chats or long kisses in the hallway. Julia felt his absence not only physically, but also emotionally. Some mornings, she would wake up early just to watch her husband sleep, as if she wanted to save those minutes before the day separated them again. Sometimes, she thought about talking about the distance that was forming between them, but she was afraid of putting even more weight on his already overburdened shoulders. And yet, there were moments when joy managed to break through the monotony, birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes, last-minute trips to the park when Lucas managed to get home early, board games on Sunday afternoons that ended with everyone laughing and hugging on the living room rug. Each small happy moment seemed to renew the hope that, despite the misunderstandings, the love that united them was still strong enough to weather any storm. Julia, in particular, clung to these moments like someone holding onto the edge of a cliff, believing that they could reverse the tide of tiredness and distance. Their home, even when it was silent during the nights when they were away, still held remnants of what they had been like in the beginning, photos of their first years together, the children's drawings stuck on the refrigerator, the growth marks scratched on the door frame of their children's bedrooms. Each object told a story of love, of family, of shared dreams. And Julia, even though her heart was heavy, made an effort every day to keep the flame that had brought them together alive, caring for the home with dedication and patiently waiting for the days when her husband would come home early so they could relive, even if only for a few minutes, what they were when they first met. At that moment, no one could have imagined the whirlwind that was approaching. The image of the happy couple, the family that everyone envied, the complicity that inspired acquaintances, everything seemed as solid as the walls of the house they had built together. But the silence between them grew, and in the empty spaces of dialogue, doubts, insecurities, fears arose that neither of them had the courage to confess out loud. And while Julia wondered if she was still loved and desired, Lucas believed that he was doing everything right by sacrificing himself for the future of the family, without realizing that the constant absence exacted a very high price for those who were left waiting at home. The couple's routine seemed to have found a strange rhythm, as if they lived in the same space but in different time zones, each one running after their responsibilities, trying to keep up appearances while something invisible and heavy hung between them. Julia began to feel increasingly alone, even with the house full of children's voices and tasks to complete, and on the days when Lucas returned, he brought with him only the weight of his obligations, the smell of the road, the tired eyes that almost never met hers. Their conversations became increasingly shallow, as if each word was carefully measured so as not to open doors that they both feared to cross. Julia still prepared his favorite dinner on the nights he returned, but there was no longer any enthusiasm in setting the table with the folded napkins that he praised so much, and the silence at dinner was filled only by the children's requests for more juice or the sound of the cutlery hitting the plates. Little by little, Julia got used to spending her nights alone, wrapped in blankets that seemed to get colder and colder, listening to the ticking of the clock that marked the slow hours until she fell asleep. The messages exchanged during the days became predictable, full of, "How was your day?" and "Give the kids a kiss," but without any trace of the desire or sweet words that used to make their hearts race. The days began to taste like reheated coffee. The hugs, when they existed, were short-lived and seemed more like automatic gestures than demonstrations of affection. She tried several times to start deeper conversations, to ask about her fears and dreams, but Lucas always avoided her, justifying his tiredness, saying he needed to rest, and so the nights piled up like concrete blocks between them. Even so, at many times, Julia still tried to convince herself that this difficult phase would pass, that love would withstand time, absences, and silence, but a restlessness began to grow in her chest when she realized that Lucas was spending more and more time away, even when he didn't need to. He began to extend trips, justifying extra meetings with clients that never ended, and he would arrive home very late, or even the next day, saying that he had slept in a hotel because he was too exhausted to drive. His calls began to be shorter, at unusual times, and Julia, with a heavy heart, began to notice that something was changing in his voice, as if he was trying to sound normal, but lacked the naturalness of someone talking to someone he loves. One day, after picking up the kids from school, Julia decided to stop by the company where Lucas said he was in a meeting until late. She arrived unannounced, just to bring him a coffee that he loved and that, in her mind, would be a gesture of affection that could break the ice that had formed between them. But when she arrived, the night watchman said that he wasn't there, that there were no meetings scheduled for that night, and that most of the employees had left the building hours earlier. Confused, Julia drove home in silence, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, her heart pounding with the feeling that she was about to discover something that could change everything. She spent the night awake, looking through their old messages, trying to find signs that she had missed, words that could have sounded like warnings of what was about to happen. The next morning, life went on as normal, but something inside her was different. Julia started to pay more attention to Lucas's schedule, paying attention to details that she had previously ignored, such as the different perfume he had started wearing, the subtle changes in the way he dressed, the impatience in trivial conversations that he had previously loved to have. When he arrived, he avoided prolonged eye contact, as if he was afraid that she would see what was in his eyes. The children sensed the strange atmosphere, asked questions that she did not know how to answer, and Julia's heart ached even more when she realized that she could no longer protect her children from the shadow that was beginning to form over the family. She tried to talk to Lucas, but her words came out shakily, while he seemed increasingly distant, colder, as if every touch of hers burned his skin instead of warming it. Some nights, she would listen to the shower running for too long and wonder if he was crying or just trying to wash away the guilt he might be starting to feel. But doubts consumed her, and each day anxiety eroded a piece of her serenity. Julia began to have dreams in which she screamed for him in endless hallways without ever reaching him, and she would wake up bathed in sweat, with her heart racing, feeling that reality was beginning to mix with her worst nightmares. Until the invitation to the company party arrived, an annual event that always marked a special moment for them, because it was at one of these parties that they had met years ago. Julia believed that this would be the perfect moment to get closer, to dance together like in the old days, to laugh like before and remember why they had fallen in love. She spent days choosing the right dress, taking care of the details to surprise him. She wanted him to see her and remember the woman he had fallen in love with. She wanted to feel the sparkle in his eyes again when he met her. She prepared herself with great care, arranged her hair with care, put on the perfume that he said he loved, and left for the party with the anticipation pulsing with every beat of her heart. When she arrived at the hall, which had been carefully lit and decorated for the occasion, she felt a twinge of nervousness and excitement, as if she were about to relive a magical moment. She walked through the hallways greeting her husband's colleagues and friends, smiling, asking about him with the eagerness of someone who couldn't wait to hug him. But with each evasive answer about where he was, with each embarrassed look from those who tried to change the subject, her heart began to weigh more heavily, and the festive atmosphere seemed to turn into a suffocating fog that made it difficult to even breathe. It was then, in the middle of a side corridor that led to the terrace illuminated by dim lights, that she saw him. Time seemed to stop, and the sounds of the party became a distant hum as her eyes focused on the image that formed before her, Lucas, in a dark suit and elegant posture, leaning over a blonde woman with wavy hair, his hands firmly holding her waist as their lips met in a kiss that left no doubt about the desire that existed between them. The ground seemed to disappear beneath Julia's feet, and for a second she thought she would faint right there, but it was anger that kept her standing, the anger that burned her chest with an intensity she had never felt before, the anger of seeing in a few seconds their entire history reduced to ashes. She approached, each step echoing like thunder in her mind, remembering every promise made, every tear shared, every night they spent watching over their feverish children, every plan they had imagined for the future. When she stopped a few steps away from the two of them, it was as if the entire room went silent, as if all eyes were turned to that trio forming in the eye of the hurricane. Lucas's eyes widened in panic when he saw her, and the kiss shattered like shattered glass, leaving the three of them immersed in a silence so dense it could almost be touched. Julia took a deep breath, feeling the air cut her throat, and in a low but firm tone like never before, she said the words that would echo forever in her memories, "Would you prefer this to being with me and your children, your family?" Her gaze was piercing his, and his desperately searched for some word that could erase what had been exposed, but there was no phrase capable of mending the tear he had made. Meanwhile, the woman next to him was trembling, surprised at having been caught, and the music from the party seemed to slowly return, mixing with the voices that were beginning to whisper, like a silent audience watching the collapse of a perfect marriage. Julia walked away slowly, each step like a sentence, knowing that from that moment on nothing would be the same again, but without imagining that behind that betrayal, an even deeper secret was about to be revealed. The house seemed like a minefield of memories when Julia returned after the party, every photo on the wall, every toy forgotten in the corner of the living room, every detail whispering memories of a happiness that now seemed distant and even cruel. She climbed the stairs with her heart pounding, her legs trembling, holding on to the banister as if the world could collapse at any second. In the bedroom, she opened the closet and began throwing clothes into the suitcase with disordered movements, but she couldn't stop hearing in her head the sound of the kiss that had torn her apart, repeating itself like a scratched record, accompanying the irregular beats of her chest. It wasn't long before the front door burst open, and Lucas came in calling for her in a desperate tone, his voice broken, as if each word was spat out in panic. She didn't answer, she continued rummaging through the drawers until he reached the bedroom door, his face pale and his eyes disoriented. "Please don't do this," he said with a cracking voice, "we need to talk, I can explain, you don't understand, you don't know what's really going on." Julia turned to him with teary eyes, holding the open suitcase like a shield between them, and for the first time in years she saw in his face not the man she once loved, but a complete stranger. "Explain what?" "That you decided to destroy our family on a whim. That you left me night after night alone while you found time for her." She was breathing in ragged breaths, the words coming out filled with anger, but also with pain, as if each syllable was cutting her throat. Lucas took a few steps closer, his hands outstretched, pleading with his eyes, but she instinctively stepped back, feeling his scent that had once comforted her and now disgusted her. "Julia, I know I was wrong, but I need you to listen to the end, there is something you don't know, something that can change everything," he begged, and at that moment her legs seemed to weaken at the urgent tone in his voice, as if there really was something bigger behind the betrayal. She sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed on the floor, while Lucas took a deep breath and ran his hands through his hair, as if trying to find the courage to say what he had been keeping inside. He began to speak in a low voice, hesitant at first, but he became more confident as the words came out. "It wasn't just about her, it wasn't just about an affair, you don't understand, I was trying to fill a void that I created myself, I no longer recognized myself as a man, as a husband, and it wasn't because I stopped loving you, but because I stopped loving myself. I was afraid of losing you, and when I realized that you still looked at me with that love, I couldn't bear the shame of what I felt, and so I moved even further away." Julia looked up, confused, tears streaming silently. "How embarrassing, Lucas. What are you talking about?" she whispered in a choked voice. He took another deep breath, his chest rising and falling as if each word was an effort, until his voice came out firm like a punch in the air filled with tension. "When you slept, I would stay awake looking at you, thinking that I would never be the man you deserved, that I wouldn't be able to make you happy forever, and I started having panic attacks, afraid of getting old, afraid of being replaced, afraid of losing my role as the man of the house. Then, on one of those trips, I met this woman, and what started as a silly conversation became a momentary relief for my insecurity. I didn't love her, I never had, I just needed to feel that I still had value, that I was still wanted." His words hung in the air like a dark cloud, while Julia trembled, feeling the ground disappear beneath her feet. "So you destroyed everything out of fear? Out of selfishness? You threw our family away because you couldn't deal with your insecurity?" she questioned in a tone that mixed incredulity and revolt. Lucas knelt before her, the tears finally escaping his eyes, dripping onto the carpet that had so often welcomed their happy steps. "It's not just that, Julia, it's not just fear, what I need to tell you is that," he took a deep breath, closed his eyes as if searching for courage in the depths of his chest, and then opened them, staring at her with his soul bare. "On the last trip, when everything was over for me, I went to an event and met someone from my past, a woman who was my first love, and she told me that she never forgot me, that she always loved me, and that she had waited all these years for a chance to have me back. She told me things that awakened feelings that I thought were dead, she moved me in a way that made me question everything we had built, everything we were." Julia's eyes widened, feeling her throat close up, her heart beating so hard it hurt. He continued, his voice growing more and more distressed. "And just when I was confused, this woman told me that before you and I met, we had an affair that resulted in a pregnancy I never knew about. She had my son, Julia, a boy who is now 13, who grew up believing another man was his father, but now knows it is me. I swear I didn't know, but when she showed me the pictures of him, it was like I was looking at my own reflection in miniature, I couldn't ignore it, I couldn't turn away." Julia stood up so quickly she almost fell, her hands covering her mouth as her wide eyes shone with terror and shock. "A son, Lucas? You have a son with another woman, a son who grew up while you built a life with me, while I fathered our children, while I believed I was everything to you?" The room seemed too small to contain the fury and pain that exploded inside her, while Lucas cried shamelessly, the words coming out between sobs. "I didn't know, Julia, I swear, I would never have hidden this if I had known, but now that I've found out, I can't stop thinking about him, about everything I've lost, about who he is, about what he needs from me. I feel like I need to know him, I need to be there, I can't turn my back on him now, but I also don't want to lose you, I love our family," he begged, holding her hands that hung trembling at her sides. Julia pushed him hard, feeling as if the contact burned her skin, and moved away until her back was against the wall, breathing as if she was short of air. "Do you think there's still an us after this? Do you think we can go on as if nothing happened, as if you hadn't destroyed everything we built?" Her voice echoed through the room, each word filled with pain, each tear falling like acid on his shattered heart. The silence that followed was heavy as stone, interrupted only by Lucas's muffled sobs, who was now sitting on the floor, his arms hugging his legs like a frightened child. Julia felt her head spinning, the room spinning as his words repeated themselves in her mind, as if the world were falling apart in slow motion. In a corner of the room, Miguel's backpack was still open, his schoolbook scattered around, cruelly reminding her of the life she would have to follow from then on, but without the foundation she believed was unshakable. Her breathing began to calm down, but her gaze remained cold and distant, as if a part of her had died there. Without saying anything else, she picked up her suitcase, threw the clothes that were on the floor inside it, and walked to the door without looking back, each step marking the end of a story that she never imagined would end like this. The wheels of Julia's car spun quickly as she drove aimlessly through streets lit only by spaced streetlights, her hands clenched on the steering wheel as if it were the only anchor keeping her conscious amidst the storm raging inside her mind. Every corner seemed the same, every traffic light just a pause in her silent despair. The tears, once hot and abundant, now flowed cold, as if crying had become a natural part of her breathing. Her cell phone vibrated non-stop, but she didn't dare look at the screen. She knew it was Lucas. She knew that each call would be nothing more than words that no longer had the strength to repair what had been crushed. She stopped at an empty gas station, turned off the car and stood there, looking at the reflection of her own eyes in the rearview mirror, as if searching in the dilated pupils for some answer to the question that burned her: how did the life that seemed so solid collapse in such a cruel way? There was no answer, just the silence of the car, interrupted by the sound of the engines of other vehicles that passed like shadows in the night. When she finally found the courage to pick up her cell phone, dozens of messages flashed on the screen, disjointed texts, audios interrupted by sobs, sentences that began with pleas for forgiveness and ended in desperate declarations of love. Julia blocked the number, hung up the phone and took a deep breath, as if the air that filled her lungs had been forcibly pushed into her chest. At that moment, she decided that she would not go home, at least not now. She started the car and drove to the house of Marina, her oldest friend, who opened the door silently as soon as she saw her standing on the sidewalk with red eyes and trembling hands. Without saying a word, Marina hugged her tightly, and there, in her friend's arms, Julia allowed herself to collapse completely, her sobs echoing through the entrance hall like the moans of a wounded animal. Marina led her to the sofa and wrapped her in a blanket, got a hot tea and sat down next to her, silently, just squeezing her hand as if to say, "I'm here." When Julia finally managed to organize her words amidst her tears, she told her everything in detail, each sentence coming out full of pain, each pause marked by the heavy sound of her breathing. Marina listened to her with a serious expression, her eyes filled with tears, but without interrupting, just letting her friend purge all the accumulated pain. When Julia's voice broke and silence hung between them, Marina firmly said that she could stay there as long as she needed, that there was no rush to decide anything, that now the most important thing was to regain the strength to take care of herself and her children. Meanwhile, Lucas remained at home, sitting on the floor of the room that still reeked of her scent, holding in his hand a photo frame with a picture of the two of them smiling on a trip to the beach years before, as if trying to wring some fragment of hope from him. The messages he sent came back as undelivered, and the emptiness that spread through the house seemed to scream louder than any words he could say. He stood up suddenly and began to pace, his mind buzzing with thoughts that ranged from anger at himself to complete hopelessness. He wanted to run to her, to beg at her feet, but he didn't know where she was, and every minute without an answer made the reality more concrete: maybe he had lost her forever. The next morning, Julia woke up at Marina's house feeling heavy in her head, as if each thought were a concrete block pressing down on her skull. She got up slowly, found Marina in the kitchen making coffee, and the two exchanged glances that needed no words. The pain was still there, but there was a silent determination rising in her chest. She called the school and explained that the children would be staying with her friend that day. She needed time to organize her mind before seeing her children. She couldn't allow them to see the destruction that was consuming their parents. Then she got dressed and went out for a walk without direction, needing to feel the wind on her face, as if it could take away part of the weight that was suffocating her. As she walked, memories of every detail of her life with Lucas came back to her like knives in succession: the smell of fresh coffee on Sunday mornings, the loving notes hidden in books, the laughter they shared during sleepless nights. She thought about her children, how they always asked their father to come home early, how she promised that next week would be different, that the family would have time to play together again. And now, every promise sounded empty, every dream she had built seemed to have been built on quicksand. But there was something different about that morning. For the first time since everything had exploded, Julia felt that she needed to think about herself, not about Lucas, not just about her children, but about herself, the woman she was before she was a wife, before she was a mother. When she returned to Marina's house, she found her phone full of messages from unknown numbers. She opened one of them and came across photos of Lucas hugging the boy he had said was his son, images taken in a square, in a restaurant, in a park, each photo a cruel confirmation that the truth was greater than any regret he could have. Her heart broke into even smaller pieces, the feeling of betrayal mixing with a pain that went beyond the marriage, because now there was another child, another bond that would forever remind her of the man who had hurt her. She threw the cell phone on the couch and curled up, bringing her legs up against her chest, as if she wanted to disappear inside herself. Meanwhile, Lucas gathered the courage to look for Julia in person. He stopped by her parents' house, went to the studio where she worked, called mutual friends, but no one gave him any news. Desperate, he started driving around the streets, as if it were possible to meet her by chance, as if the universe could have mercy and put her in his path. When he finally parked the car in front of Marina's house, he hesitated for several minutes before getting out. He was afraid of what he would hear, afraid of looking into the eyes of the woman he had destroyed, afraid of admitting that the words he needed to say might no longer have any value. Marina answered the door with a serious face, blocking the entrance with her body. "You shouldn't be here," she said firmly, but Lucas begged, pleaded, saying that he only needed a few minutes to explain, that he couldn't move on without trying to show the truth. Marina took a deep breath, looked inside the house, turned her eyes to him and, reluctantly, stepped aside, allowing him to enter the room where Julia was sitting, huddled, as if the sound of his voice was a trigger that would make her collapse again. Lucas walked over to her, knelt down, but before he could touch her hand, she pulled it away as if the simple contact would contaminate her. He began to speak with a choked voice, telling her everything that had happened since he had met the woman from his past, detailing how the discovery of his son had devastated him, how every day since then had been torture between wanting to be there for the boy and not being able to bear the idea of losing the family he had built with Julia. He confessed that he had sought out lawyers to understand his rights, that he had discovered that he could approach his son legally, but he didn't want to do anything without talking to her, without sharing the pain and the weight of what that meant. Julia listened to him in silence, her face expressionless, her hands clenched into fists on her lap. When he finished, she slowly looked up, and her eyes seemed like two sharp blades. "Are you telling me that you plan to bring this child into our lives without even consulting me? That you were thinking of putting him in the same house where our children sleep? How did you think that could work, Lucas?" He stammered, saying that he wanted to be honest, that he didn't intend to force her to accept anything, but that he also couldn't live divided between two worlds anymore. Julia stood up abruptly, the chair creaking loudly in the silence of the room, and began to pace back and forth, her voice coming out firm, almost cold. "I dedicated years of my life to building this family with you. I sacrificed dreams, endured your absences, carried the responsibility of keeping our home standing alone while you were out there telling yourself that you did all this for us. And now I discover that you, the man I trusted the most, have another son, a son who exists because you decided to sleep with another woman before you even met me, but you hid this part of your past until the moment you couldn't anymore. What is left for me? Where is my value, my dignity, my voice?" Marina remained silent near the door, ready to intervene if the situation got out of hand, but also aware that no one could take away her friend's chance to say everything that was pent up in her chest. Lucas got up from the floor, tears streaming down his face, his eyes wide as if he only now understood the depth of the abyss he had dug. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said in a broken voice, "but I wanted you to know that I never stopped loving you, that everything I did was out of fear, out of cowardice, and that if I could go back in time, I would do everything differently." Julia stared at him with a blank look, as if she were searching inside him for some trace of the man she loved, but could no longer see anything other than disappointment. "You say you love me, but those who love don't destroy like that, those who love don't turn the other into a victim of their mistakes, those who love protect, care, share, don't hide," she said in a low voice, but sharp as a blade. The silence that followed was so heavy that it seemed to compress the air, and Marina breathed a sigh of relief as Julia picked up her bag and headed for the door. Without looking back, she simply said that she needed time, that she didn't know what she would do, but that he shouldn't look for her until she was ready to talk. As she left, she felt that each step marked the beginning of an uncertain but inevitable path, a path that she had to walk alone, with enough courage to rebuild herself from the pieces that remained of her history. The days that followed the confrontation were like living in a bad dream for Julia, each morning a struggle to get out of bed, each night a battle to quiet her mind and be able to sleep. The normal sounds of routine, the alarm clock ringing, the sound of the kettle whistling, the children's laughter as Marina picked them up to take them to school, seemed like distant echoes of a life that she no longer recognized as her own. There was an uncomfortable silence in her heart, as if it had been emptied, and her thoughts ran wildly, alternating between memories of the love that united her to Lucas and the pain that tore her apart every time she remembered what he had revealed. She felt torn between the love that still persisted, despite everything, and the urgent need to protect herself and her children from an emotional whirlwind that could swallow them all if she wasn't careful. It wasn't just anger or sadness, but a feeling of having been torn from her own home and thrown into a place where nothing made sense. In the rare moments when she was able to be alone, Julia mentally ran through all the paths that could open up from then on, but none of them seemed to offer peace. Taking Lucas back meant living with the constant presence of that revealed secret. It meant living with the fear that, at any moment, more painful truths could emerge and further hurt what was left of her self-esteem. On the other hand, the idea of separating for good, of raising her children in different homes, of explaining to them that their father had another child outside of that marriage, made a lump form in her throat, because, even though she was hurt, she still believed in the importance of a united family, even if she no longer knew how to make that possible without losing her own sanity. With each thought, she felt her head spin and her chest tighten, as if it were impossible to find an answer that would not cause her suffering. Meanwhile, Lucas tried to reorganize his days, but it was as if everything around him had lost its color. The house that once pulsated with the sound of children's laughter now echoed empty, the walls seemed colder, each piece of furniture reminded him of happy moments that now tortured him. He walked through the rooms in silence, trying to find some comfort in the family photos that decorated the living room, but each image was like a silent accusation that he had destroyed what was most precious. At work, he could barely concentrate, and his colleagues noticed the change. The once confident and dedicated man now seemed like a shadow, with a lost look and short answers. He spent hours looking at his phone, writing messages that he did not send, searching for words that could make Julia believe in him again, but he deleted them one by one, aware that no promise would be enough to erase what he had done. Marina watched her friend with growing concern, helping as much as she could, but knowing that the decision about the future would be up to Julia alone. She suggested that she seek professional help, that she talk to a therapist, not only to better understand her feelings, but to find the strength to rebuild herself, with or without Lucas. Julia listened to the advice carefully and, after days of hesitation, made an appointment. The office was a bright and welcoming space, but at the same time it exposed her vulnerabilities in a brutal way. Sitting in the armchair, recounting the strange story of love, disappointment and secrets, she realized how alone she felt, even surrounded by people willing to help her. Every time she spoke out loud about what had happened, she felt as if reality became more painful, but also clearer, as if she were gradually revealing layers of feelings that she didn't even know existed. The children, no matter how much Marina tried to distract them, began to realize that something was wrong. Miguel began to ask frequently when they could go home, why their father didn't come to pick them up, why their mother cried when she thought they weren't looking. Sophia, on the other hand, began to have nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night calling for her mother, as if she was afraid of being abandoned too. Each of their questions was like a punch in the stomach for Julia, who tried hard to smile and say that everything would be okay, even when she didn't believe her own words. It was when she saw the sadness on her children's faces that she realized she needed to find a way, whatever it was, so that they wouldn't carry the consequences of their parents' mistakes forever. Meanwhile, Lucas decided to seek help on his own, scheduling meetings with specialists who could guide him on how to approach the son he had discovered so late, but without causing even more damage to his already wounded family. Each meeting made him delve deeper into feelings he had previously ignored: guilt, shame, fear, but also a genuine need to be a present father to the boy he had never known existed. At the same time, he began writing a long letter to Julia, putting down on paper everything he had never been able to express in spoken words, trying to show that, despite the unforgivable mistakes, there was still in his heart the desire to fix things, to take care of her, to protect the family, even though he knew it might be too late for any redemption. One rainy morning, Julia decided she needed to face Lucas again. She asked Marina to look after the children and arranged to meet at a discreet cafe. When he arrived, he seemed thinner, haggard, with the empty look of someone carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. They sat in silence for long minutes, the sound of the rain hitting the windows serving as a soundtrack for a moment when even breathing seemed difficult. When they finally began to speak, the words flowed as if they were both too exhausted to hide what they felt. Lucas asked for forgiveness once more, but in a less desperate way, as if he already understood that he had no control over destiny, while Julia spoke about her pain with surprising serenity, as if sadness had given way to a silent strength. They discussed the future, the children, the other boy who was now part of Lucas's life. Each sentence was an invitation to a deeper moral dilemma, because Julia had to choose between staying in a family that would never be the same again or giving up everything and starting from scratch, knowing that nothing would guarantee that the pain would disappear. Lucas, in turn, had to decide how he would divide himself between the responsibility that had arisen and the love he said he still felt for Julia, knowing that any choice would leave open wounds. The conversation ended without a decision, but with the promise that both would think about each word spoken before taking any step. When they stood up to leave, their eyes met and, for the first time in a long time, there was mutual understanding, even if fraught with sadness. That night, when she arrived at Marina's house, Julia allowed herself to cry in silence, but for the first time since everything began, she felt that perhaps there was still hope of finding a way, even if it was just to regain her inner peace. Meanwhile, Lucas returned home and spent hours looking at old photos, remembering every detail that made that family special, recognizing how he had allowed the fear of not being enough to lead him to make mistakes that perhaps could never be fixed. He slept on the couch, hugging a teddy bear that Sophia had forgotten, wishing with all his might that the next day would bring a chance, however small, to fix what he had destroyed. The next morning, Julia woke up before sunrise, her mind pulsing with the conversations of the previous night and the anguish that seemed rooted in every muscle of her body. The rain had given way to a cloudy sky, and the cold wind that blew through the open window seemed to announce that new challenges were on the way. She got up slowly, as if each movement required a superhuman effort, and looked at the guest room where the children slept, their faces peaceful in a world that she felt less and less capable of protecting. She went down to the kitchen and found Marina sitting at the table, reading the news on her cell phone, who looked up and simply offered her a coffee, without saying anything, as if she understood that sometimes silence is the only possible language in the face of so much pain. After a few sips, Julia took a deep breath and said in a hoarse voice that she needed to leave, needed to look truth in the eyes, needed to understand how life could go on after all this. She drove without knowing exactly where she was going, until she found herself parking in front of the house of the woman who had changed her destiny by revealing the existence of the son Lucas had had in the past. The low gate revealed the unkempt garden, toys scattered about, and Julia watched for a few minutes, feeling her heart race at every sound that came from inside the house. When she finally rang the doorbell, the woman appeared at the door with a surprised expression, her eyes wide as she recognized who was there. There was a heavy silence, until Julia asked, in a firm and low voice, if she could come in. The woman hesitated, but made room, leading her to the living room that exuded the smell of reheated coffee and nostalgia, with photos scattered around that told the story of a parallel life that Julia never imagined existed. They sat in opposite armchairs, their hands resting on the arms of the seats, as if they needed support to keep from collapsing. The woman began to speak before Julia could ask anything, saying that she had never intended to destroy a family, that she had also been a victim of circumstances, that she had loved Lucas when she was young, but that he had disappeared from her life before she could tell her about the pregnancy. Julia listened in silence, analyzing every word, every gesture, looking for signs of lies or manipulation, but everything seemed to be filled only with old hurt and regret. When the woman took a photo of the boy and handed it to Julia, saying that he was sweet, studious, and passionate about soccer, Julia felt her legs weaken. The image of the boy smiling like a copy of Lucas when he was young made her stomach turn. After a long conversation, the woman asked if Julia wanted to meet the boy, but the answer came quickly and dryly, no, at least not now. She didn't know if she would be able to look at that face without feeling anger, fear, pain, a confusion of emotions that refused to be organized. When she got up to leave, the woman held her hand for a brief second and apologized with teary eyes, saying that she hoped that, one day, everyone could find a way to live in peace, because deep down, no one there had chosen that fate. Julia left with her mind even heavier, as if each step to the car was taken in quicksand, and when she got in the vehicle, she let the tears flow freely, no longer trying to control the pain that was suffocating her. When she got back to Marina's house, she found her children sitting in the living room, watching cartoons without paying much attention, and that was when she realized how much she needed to be strong for them. She sat between them, pulled them close and hugged them tightly, breathing in the childlike scent that had always been her greatest comfort. They stayed like that in silence for several minutes, until Miguel asked why they had been at Marina's house for so long, and Julia felt her heart tighten even more. She calmly explained that their dad and mom were dealing with serious adult problems, but that they were not to blame for anything, that they were loved above all else, and that she would never leave them. Miguel and Sofia listened attentively, but their innocence meant that they did not understand the gravity of the situation, and that made her realize how urgent it was to resolve everything before the chaos began to affect them irreversibly. Meanwhile, Lucas continued to look for a way to show that he wanted to make amends. He began attending therapy sessions, where he expressed his regret and his fear of losing his family, and little by little he began to understand that it would be useless to try to fix everything with just promises or emotional speeches. He needed to change from the inside out, he needed to rebuild trust not with words, but with consistent actions, patience, and respect for the time that Julia needed. When he felt stronger, he would write her long emails, but never send them, understanding that it was not the time yet. Instead, he began to plan a way to take care of his newly discovered son without invading Julia's space, seeking out lawyers specialized in family mediation, trying to anticipate solutions so that, if she ever agreed to talk about it, he would have concrete answers. One cold afternoon, Marina suggested that Julia spend a few hours alone to gather her thoughts, offering to take the children to the movies. Julia accepted and decided to walk to the park where she had played so many times with Lucas and the children on happy days. Every bench, every tree, every sound of the wind rustling the leaves brought back memories that blended into a painful collage of love and betrayal. She sat on one of the benches and watched a couple playing with their young son, the sound of their laughter making her chest burn, because all she wanted was to go back in time, to before everything was lost. As she watched, she remembered the nights when Lucas would come home late, the different smell, the rehearsed excuses, and she realized how, even before the revelation, their love was already wearing thin. For the first time, she allowed herself to admit that perhaps, even without the secret, the relationship was already heading towards the abyss. As the sun set, dyeing the sky orange and purple, she felt her cell phone vibrate in her pocket. It was a message from Lucas, simply asking if he could see her, saying that he couldn't stand being without news any longer, that he needed to know if there was any chance, even if it was minimal, of rebuilding something. Julia stared at the screen for several minutes, her thumb hovering over the reply button, until she decided to schedule a meeting for the next day, at a quiet cafe near the square. When the time came, she entered the place and saw him sitting at the table, his hands clasped together, his eyes lowered as if he were praying. When he saw her, he stood up quickly, but didn't try to hug her, just pulled out her chair gently, showing respect for the space she needed. They sat in silence, each struggling to find the right words. Lucas began by saying that he didn't expect forgiveness, but he needed her to know how sorry he was, that every day without her and their children was an unbearable reminder of what he had lost. Julia calmly interrupted him, saying that she didn't want to hear any more excuses, that she needed facts, actions, clarity about the future. She asked what he would do about his son, how he intended to maintain this new fatherhood without further destroying the stability of the two little ones they already had. Lucas explained, more calmly than she expected, that he had hired specialists, that he intended to guarantee the boy's support and presence without this meaning confusion or disrespect for her and the children they had raised together. He promised that he wouldn't put Julia in a position to choose between staying with him or living with constant pain, that he would accept whatever decision she made, but that he wouldn't give up on doing what was right for the son she had just discovered. There were moments of intense emotion in the conversation, especially when he told her that he had known the boy for brief encounters and how he had felt when he first saw him, how the feeling of having lost precious years had torn him apart inside. Julia, although she tried to keep her tone firm, felt her heart waver every time she saw the sincerity in his eyes, but she reminded herself that sincerity does not erase the damage done. They discussed how they would tell the children everything, if it came to that, and realized that there was much to be decided before any announcement was made. Julia made it clear that she did not know if she could forgive him, but she recognized that he was trying in a way she never imagined he would be able to, and that, as contradictory as it was, awakened in her a spark of respect that she thought she had lost forever. When they left the cafe, they walked side by side in silence along the sidewalks wet from the previous night's rain, each step echoing the uncertainty of the future. Lucas asked if he could accompany her to Marina's house, but Julia kindly declined, saying that she needed this time alone to process everything. When they said goodbye, he held her hand for a few seconds, not to hold it, but as if he needed to feel that there was still life, still hope, before letting go and watching her walk away down the street lit only by the yellow lights of the street lamps. When they got home, Marina waited with the children asleep on the couch, and Julia watched them sleep for long minutes, stroking their hair as she felt that, even if the future was uncertain, she would find the strength to face any storm as long as she had those two little ones by her side. Time passed like a cold wind that blows away the dry autumn leaves, and life forced everyone to move, even when the pain seemed to glue their feet to the ground. Julia decided to rent a small apartment in a neighborhood close to the one she used to call home, where the children could continue studying at the same school, maintaining some kind of routine amidst the chaos that had befallen the family. The first night alone with her children was silent, only the sound of Miguel and Sophia's calm breathing reminded her that, despite her fear, she still had reasons to stay on her feet. The days turned into weeks, and little by little Julia began to build a new routine, discovering that there was strength in each small victory, like making dinner alone, taking the children to the park without thinking about who wasn't there, sleeping without feeling the need to hear the key turn in the door to know that she was no longer alone. At the same time, she began attending weekly sessions with the therapist, where she discovered, with each conversation, that her wounds were deep, but that the human heart's capacity for healing is greater than she imagined. Lucas tried to move on with his life, but it was like walking among ruins. Even with therapy, work, and meetings with the son he had discovered late, the emptiness inside him became increasingly deafening. The silent house, the overly tidy rooms, the drawers empty of his children's toys, everything seemed to mock him, reminding him at every step that he had lost what he loved most due to choices he could not undo. He began to dedicate part of his days to the boy, trying to be the father he had never been, but even the happy moments with the boy were crossed by a sadness he could not hide, because every laugh also reminded him of the absence of the children he had raised with Julia. There were days when he would spend hours standing at the school door, just to see them from afar, but without the courage to approach them, respecting Julia's request to keep his distance while she sorted out her feelings. The nights became long companions of regret, and even when sleep came, dreams were populated by images of Julia smiling, followed by the memory of the moment when everything fell apart. Miguel and Sophia, despite their mother's efforts to protect them, began to realize that the changes were permanent. Their father's absence from important moments, such as school presentations or birthdays, raised questions that were difficult to answer. Julia chose to be honest, explaining in simple words that Dad had made serious mistakes, but that he still loved them. The children, in their innocence, continued to love their father, but they began to live with the strange feeling that something bad could happen at any moment, an insecurity that Julia tried to combat with hugs, conversations and constant displays of affection. Still, every time they heard about their father, their eyes lit up with hope, and this tore Julia apart inside, torn between the desire to protect her children and the knowledge that she could not erase Lucas from their lives. The woman who revealed the truth also saw her life change. Upon realizing the depth of the destruction caused, she decided to step away, giving Lucas space to deal with the consequences of what they both carried. She continued to raise her son with dignity, but always reminding him that she could not force anyone to love him, that his father's presence would be a slow, perhaps painful, but necessary construction for the boy to grow up knowing who he was. In the meetings between father and son, the boy showed curiosity and joy, but also strangeness, because for him, Lucas was still an unknown figure, someone who had suddenly appeared, promising love and care. Each visit was a mixture of discovery and embarrassment, and Lucas, despite trying to hide it, carried the anguish of knowing that, even if he wanted to, he could not recover the years they spent apart. Marina, in turn, became even closer to Julia, taking on the role of confidant, advisor and, often, the only person who could get a genuine smile out of her friend. She was the one who helped Julia find a new apartment, who took care of the children when the tears came in unexpected waves, who reminded her that, despite everything, Julia was strong and deserved to start over without forever carrying the guilt of the other person's mistakes. It was Marina who encouraged Julia to leave the house, to resume small pleasures like walking in the park, going to the movies, meeting friends, reminding her that life could still be beautiful even after having been so cruel. When the first Christmas after the separation arrived, Julia prepared dinner with the children, decorated the small apartment with lights and ornaments, and cried silently while wrapping the presents. During the night, Miguel asked if Daddy would come, and Julia sweetly replied that he would not, but that he loved them very much. When the children fell asleep, Julia sat alone in the living room, surrounded by toys and wrapping paper, and felt a mixture of pain and pride, pain for what she had lost, but pride for having made it this far, for not letting the pain destroy who she was, for having learned that, even with a broken heart, she could move on. That same Christmas, Lucas stayed home, alone, looking at the tree he had put up days before in a burst of hope, but which now seemed to mock his loneliness. He spent the night revisiting every text message he had exchanged with Julia, rereading the promises made in the past, and at a certain point he got up, grabbed the car keys and drove to the neighborhood where he knew she lived. He stopped a block away, turned off the engine and stood there, looking at the lights blinking in the apartment windows, imagining what they must have been like inside her home, if the children were happy, if Julia remembered him. When the clock struck midnight, he whispered an "I love you" to the void, feeling the tears flow, before starting the car again and disappearing down the empty road. As the months went by, Julia found new reasons to smile. She rekindled old friendships, resumed her yoga practice, signed up for online courses, and, even though she was afraid, she began to imagine that there might be someone, somewhere, capable of loving her as she deserved. She no longer cried every night, and the mornings were no longer so heavy, as she learned that solitude could be a space for self-knowledge, not just suffering. When she lay down among her children to read stories, she felt at peace, knowing that, despite everything, she had managed to keep their love intact, and that was greater than any destruction that the betrayal could have caused. The boy Lucas discovered as his son, over time, began to receive more frequent visits from his father, and together they built a delicate but promising relationship. There were moments of estrangement, but also of complicity, and with each smile he received, Lucas felt that, even in the midst of chaos, it was possible to plant something good. Still, with each meeting, the absence of Miguel and Sofia weighed like lead on his heart, reminding him that mistakes have consequences that do not disappear just because someone wants them to. On the last date between Lucas and Julia, on a clear afternoon, they sat in a cafe and talked about the future of their children. There was serenity in their voices, even though their eyes shone with painful memories. Julia made it clear that she could not resume the marriage, but that she was willing to allow the children to have contact with their father, as long as he respected her boundaries and never involved the children in his adult problems. Lucas agreed, accepting with maturity that starting over would be more about learning to be a present father than trying to rebuild a relationship that had fallen apart due to his own choices. And so, each one went their separate ways. Julia, stronger and more aware of her own worth, decided that her heart deserved someone who not only said they loved her, but who demonstrated it with daily actions. Lucas, carrying the pain of having destroyed his own family, learned that love is not enough without respect, and that honesty is the foundation on which any relationship needs to be built. Miguel and Sofia, even though they were confused, grew up knowing that they were deeply loved, and that, above all, they were not to blame for anything that happened. Comment below what you thought of this story. We really want to hear your opinion. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our exciting stories. Remember, betrayal destroys more than just relationships, it shatters dreams, erodes trust and leaves a lasting mark on the betrayed. Our channel does not support, under any circumstances, any type of betrayal. May this story serve as a reflection on the value of love, loyalty, and sincere dialogue in a family.